Welcome to Hello Port Hueneme. I'm your host Tom Dunn, and today we're doing a City Council review of the council meeting that took place on July 17th. And with me to review the meeting is Mayor Tom Figg. Welcome to the show, Tom.
Hi, Tom. Good morning.
I thought this was a really good
Yes.
meeting in that there was good attendance, and we had a lot of issues were covered and decided upon. So I think the people enjoy hearing about those. Before the City Council meeting, you had a closed session. Would you briefly explain that to the people and the couple things that you covered?
Okay, first of all, closed session deals with a very limited number of matters that the laws of the state of California allow public agencies to discuss behind closed doors. One of them has to do with real estate negotiations. So the item that was being considered in closed session had to do with selecting one of the 6 respondents to proposals for the Industrial Avenue property, where the city currently has some of its municipal operations. The top contender is Yilo Industries. Yilo was early on expressed interest in this property, but then had to go through a process by which their business model and their proposal had to be squared up and scrutinized against the other competitors. As it turned out, they were on the top of the list. They had the strongest business model, the most revenue potential to the city, and they have a proven track record that seemed to be a perfect fit for this particular property and certainly for the city at large. So what we announced was the selection of Yilo to enter into what we call exclusive negotiations. That sets a period of 30 days for us to hammer out the deal points, everything from the actual return of revenue to the city through the business activities they conduct, to the permitting and the scheduling for public hearings for the area property owners and residents to become more involved in the the reuse of this particular property. So that was the action that was taken, simply to narrow down the playing field, so to speak, and deal with just one entity, and then to negotiate out a contract over the course of the next 30 days.
You also discussed the Housing Authority. What was that about?
Well, the Housing Authority matter was pretty straightforward. It was a business item, simply following up on what the federal government has asked our authority to do in the way of procurement policies. By that I mean the purchasing of supplies and goods for operations. The federal government has its own template of how those policies should work, and they asked us to replicate those policies different than the policies the city currently has, and which is kind of unusual in that our policies, those that bind the city proper for purchasing goods and supplies, is in many respects more restrictive than the federal government's policies. So it was a pretty straightforward, yes, we'll follow up on what the federal government has asked us to do, at least from the Housing Authority side of the House.
Okay. Okay, next we're going to cover the various department heads' reports. And the first one is from the Public Works Department. And they reported on, the first thing was the big coral tree, which many of you see when you come into the City Hall, is going to be removed. Why is that?
Well, all trees have a certain life. In this case, horticulturists has determined that it's diseased, this particular tree, because of the drought, the extended drought. And that generated a good bit of dialogue among the council and staff of, well, perhaps we should be assessing our total inventory of these theme trees. The coral tree is a theme tree for the city. A lot of people think of it as somewhat of a nuisance because they get big and their limbs get heavy and they occasionally break. So we had some discussion about, well, let's maybe assess all of our trees, see what condition they're in, and if need be, we begin to replace all of the trees. And there was a discussion about, well, if we do that, then we ought to take a look at our entire plant palette, because the city has invested a lot in its streetscapes, dealing with shrubbery and ground cover and the like, and that maybe we ought to take a look at that as well and transition to more of a zero-scape kind of approach, or at least one that's more coastal in nature, recognizing that water will continue to be in short supply.
And as we saw at a council meeting a month or so ago, Ventura County is one of only 2 counties that is still in a drought condition as far as the local source of water that we have. We're still getting most of it from Northern California, but we're the only red one on the map that shows, so it's something we definitely have to look into.
Well, let me back up just for a second. Part of the reason we had such a busy evening on the 17th is that we had actually 5 different meetings. The first was, even before the city council meeting, was our Port Hueneme Water Agency meeting. And we had a presentation from the executive director of the Callegas Water District, which is one of our 2 suppliers. That's the state water side of the source of water we receive. Our primary source of water is from United Water Conservation District, which is groundwater, the aquifers. And the interesting presentation that was made focused in large part on, the past year we've had record rains and precipitation, and most of it focused in Northern California, and yet a lot of that water we're not being able to advantage ourselves here in Southern California for a variety of reasons. Environmental concerns, and there's always the politics of water and water rights, but one of the solutions being looked at is what they call the Delta tunnels, which is to provide water directly from areas northern of the Delta and bypass the Delta and bring that water back to the aqueduct and our various other transporting vehicles that we have to get water from Northern California to Southern California. It was a very interesting discussion. And I've asked if that presentation can be made available to us so that we can post it on the city's website and allow people to listen in on this. It was a very enlightening discussion, and I'll see if I can also make that available to Hello Port Hueneme. I think that people would be very interested in understanding that we don't necessarily have a water shortage issue in California, we have a water distribution issue. And this discussion, I think, will help clarify that whole matter.
Yeah, so. And also I'd like to publish it on Port Hueneme News, where
absolutely
get the word out so people can be informed. That's so
what it's all about.
Yeah. A big issue among a lot of people in the city is the Miranda Park tennis courts, and it looks like something's going to happen there.
Well, it's been long in the works. It's unfortunate that we've, because of staffing constraints and organizational issues, we've finally settled out with a permanent set of department heads and backfilled some of our staffing shortages. So now we're finally able to revisit some of these capital projects that have been on the books for quite some time, and the first and foremost is the resurfacing of 6 of the 8 tennis courts at Miranda Park. Once that's done, there'll be additional work performed that will include resurfacing the basketball courts, rethatching all the ball fields at Miranda, and then installing and upgrading lighting for both the ball fields and the tennis courts as well as the basketball area. Those improvements will take a period of 1 to 3 years, partly because of the funding and mechanism and how you can stage that money as it becomes available. And part of it just is you don't want to necessarily shut the entire park down at one time to do those improvements. You try to stage them so that only portions of the park have to be taken out of service. But the good news is that the tennis courts are the first to receive that attention, and we're keeping our fingers crossed that maybe by Labor Day it'll be completed. And that tends to be a period of time when tennis tournaments seem to crop up, and we want to be able to take advantage of that opportunity. So we're all hoping we can get this accomplished by then.
And we used to be part of the big Ojai tournament.
The Ojai Valley tournament, and I think we're all hopeful that we can resume that relationship. But the first order of business is you got to get the tennis courts in a condition worthy of that involvement.
Talking about getting conditions worthy of involvement, there's been some beach improvements going on down there.
Well, and it's the same thing, is that there's been a lot of deferred maintenance that has accumulated over time. Again, partly explained by the our staffing situation and organizational transition. But now we have this staffing circumstance, I think, fully resolved, and that allows us now to deploy resources to address these issues. So the first order of business is cleaning up the two restrooms that serve the beach, the picnic pads and the windscreens, which have fallen in somewhat of disrepair, and then the promenade itself, everything from the concrete steps and the flags that kind of signify our beach at each one of the prominent areas of the beach. All of that is being addressed now. Beyond that, we're working on a longer range vision for what kind of permanent improvements should be made to the park, or to replace those that are already there. Things like swing sets, perhaps additional showers, like the one that was lost in the last erosion event at the far west end of the beach. Beyond just the bringing our facility up to the stated condition that it deserves, we are looking beyond that to permanent additional capital improvements, and that'll roll out over the course of the next year to 2 years.
It's very important for the city to project a user-friendly beach, which is our #1 asset that we have. So I'm glad to see, in many cases, the city is moving forward on this, and I think the people, as they go around, they'll see that work is being done.
It's contagious. It feeds off of itself. When people see things happening, like the street or pedestrian improvements that have been made recently along Surfside Drive, and they in turn let the council and let the staff know they very much appreciate it. Thank you for jumping on it. It's very contagious, and it feeds on itself, and so staff wants to do even more because they see it's generating a positive feel within the community.
One of the things I've heard is from all the department heads, the Public Works, the Police Department, the Water Department, City Hall, is they're all trying to work on a 24-hour response to citizens' inquiries. And I've seen on various media sources where people have really said, hey, this is really nice, because we did have the reputation of they didn't answer me back or anything. So the whole process is becoming much more, again, user-friendly for the citizens.
Well, and I don't want to shortchange our volunteers for that matter. Folks that have taken an interest in, for instance, the Alaska Air Flight 261 Memorial, which didn't necessarily fall in disrepair, but it was not being maintained very well. It was being overtaken by sand, and occasionally graffiti would show up. And the city didn't necessarily jump on that. It was the volunteers that said, we take pride in our facilities. We love this town, and we recognize that staff is in short supply and can't be everywhere at all times, and so let's take it upon ourselves to to spruce up our community. And so they're a big contributor to this kind of resurgence of community pride, and I'm thrilled to see that happening.
You briefly mentioned, we'll go into it a little bit more right now, is traffic safety. And the Public Works Department has, I think so far, looked into 7 different areas in Port Hueneme where they have taken up trying to make the streets and the venues safer for everybody.
Right.
Can you cover that a little bit about what was
Well,
done?
the first focus was on those things that could be done in short order, and then secondly, to focus on areas where pedestrians are at greatest risk or generate the most traffic. And that would be in the area of the beach. So Surfside Drive has been designated as the kind of the priority, immediate priority, and most folks probably have noticed the signage has been upgraded. It's more reflective. The crosswalks have received greater designations so that people will see it in daytime as well as nighttime. And then further up along the Bubbling Springs corridor, there are several places where the linear park crosses main streets. Those crosswalks have received similar treatment. So those were easy to be done, and they were done in-house, and that's why they were done so quickly. Now, some of the other pedestrian safety and traffic issues are a little bit more provocative and are going to take longer to do. Could involve speed humps, it could be reconfiguring some of the intersections, and that'll take a little bit more time and effort to engineer, and then most likely will have to be bid out for private contractors.
Like electrical signals and
exactly
flashing lights and all that.
That kind of thing. But the point being is that you're seeing plans come to fruition. This was a component of the strategic plan that the council adopted back in March of this year, and now you're seeing it, the rubber hitting the road, literally.
Yeah.
And that's what I think is, again, helping to fuel this sense of upward progression, that people are feeling good again about their community because things are happening.
Exactly.